Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are listening from or watching from, I should say, and welcome to the fifth Pep Talk live stream. I'm your host, Gus Ryan, Head of Marketing here in Pep Talk, and today we're hoping to be joined by Steve Worthy. Of course, we're having some connectivity issues, but we should be joined by Steve. I know he's trying to get in, so we should be joined by him shortly. And as ever, Niall O'Carroll will be joining me on the broadcast. So just by way of introduction to Pep Talk, we are a unique team and engagement action platform that allows managers to get the best from themselves, but ultimately from their team as well. And how we do that is a kind of a three-stage process. So we use insights by checking in with the team. We have some couple of features in the product that allow the team to check in. Once we have those insights, we turn them into action. So we will give the team stuff to do, be it around productivity, connectivity, well-being, whatever it is you want to do. You can do individual courses. You can do what we call paths, which are a series of content and information, videos, challenges, etc., to get through to bring you ultimately to your goal. And then once you've done that, we will measure it and give you the results, so you know if you're progressing along. And yes, that's the Pep Talk platform, as I should say. So what I'm going to do now is bring in my co-host, as ever, Niall O'Carroll, Chief of Global Partnerships at Pep Talk. Good afternoon, Niall.
Hey, Gus, how you doing, man?
I am good. How are you?
I sure living the dream.
I was just explaining there that Steve is enduring some connectivity issues, but look, we'll plow on anyway. We'll talk about what we were going to talk about, and hopefully Steve will join us. So the theme today was top 5 leadership competencies. And the first thing I want to do, actually, while we're waiting for Steve to join, is I just want to throw this up, because I think, as you said, Niall, it's always a good time to bring in the great Simon Sinek. And he's got a couple of great TED Talks, but this is one of them. Why good leaders make you feel safe. And that's his whole thing, is that, shouldn't press play. The leader's main role is to make you safe. And I thought this was a great quote from the talk. And basically, in a nutshell, it says leadership is a choice, not a rank. So it doesn't have to be the guy who's top of the totem pole. He goes on to say that sometimes authorities are the guys on top, but no one would actually follow them. They're there because they're an authority rather than a leader. And he talks about people who are maybe at the bottom of the totem pole or lower down in the organization. They have no authority, but they're absolutely leaders, and people would follow them. And the main reason people would follow them is because they look after the person to the left and the right of them. And that's what a leader is. And it harks back to the title of the TED Talk: Good leaders make you feel safe. So as an opening gambit, Niall, talk to me just about why good leaders make you feel safe and why that's important.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a great place to start, Gus. And I think it's really important, actually. And I mentioned this to you off air, but I recorded an interview a couple of days ago with a coach, a guy called Dana Cavaglia. And Dana's the high performance director with the New York Yankees when they won the World Series, and he's worked with like a series of really high performing professional sporting outfits. And Dana's very much a no nonsense kind of coach. He's very much don't whine about excuses, just do it. Be really direct and, get the job done. Which on one level is the old school way of thinking, that a leader tells you what to do and you go and do it. On the other level, it does bring up an interesting argument. When you talk about safety, or I talk an awful lot about leader care, sometimes that message morphs into something where we become really soft and everybody needs a hug, and it's all kind of sitting on a campfire toasting s'mores, singing Kumbaya kind of thing, And actually, when there's room for everything, because we are all different personalities, we all have different skill sets. When you look at all this talk about safety and care, it's almost like you're saying that somebody who doesn't have the personality or the brain direction to have those soft conversations can't possibly be a leader. And that's actually not what we're saying. But what we're saying is that you have to create an environment where you take the team with you. The measurement of success for a leader is how well the team do. It's not how well you stand there and go, I'm brilliant, I've achieved all these things. It's how well the people on your team do, and how can you bring all the different individuals and personalities on your team with you on a journey. And it's where the great coaches, and when I spoke to Dana, we were talking about, like, he coached the great baseball player Derek Jeter. Like, that New York Yankees team were incredible, but he spoke about the fact that you had guys in that team. You had the catcher in that team and his understudy coming to blows on the field in a game, or in a training game, literally like punching each other's lights out. That evening they went for dinner together. And it's that kind of thing about, okay, well, what was the difference between that happening on the field and them going for dinner? And the difference was the leader, as in the head coach of that organization, who sat the two of them down, got them to understand where their differences were, why they were doing what they were doing, and then appreciating that they, like, the understudy couldn't be successful if the starter didn't perform. And if the starter didn't perform, the understudy was going to step in, and they needed each other. And it became this whole conversation about, it's okay to feel frustrated, to be unhappy with each other. You don't have to be best friends all the time, but you have a job to do. You need to know your role. And you also need to understand that when you two go at each other like that, the message that's sending to the rest of the team is divisive. So how do you two guys figure out how to work together so the rest of the team grow? And actually, in the aftermath of that event, those two guys figured out a way to work together. And the rest of the team then latched on to what the head coach was saying and going, okay, we're in a good place here. Like, if these two guys can get on and function in the best interest of the team, well, then the rest of us can buy in. And that, to me, is a great example of safety and a leader who is not afraid to have the difficult conversations, but also a leader who is comfortable in bringing people into a room, exchanging views, listening to what they have to say, and then kind of making sure that we're all on the same page going forward. And sometimes the great leaders, and actually Sam White spoke about this in our latest podcast, Gus, when she spoke about hiring her corporate psychologist. She fired herself as CEO of her own company and hired this guy who was a corporate psychologist who was coaching her, who had no real business experience. And she kept hiring people in very senior roles who had business experience. And she realized that actually that's not what she needed, because she felt she needed some people who had more experience than she did. But actually what she needed in this instance, and where she's found enormous success off the back of this decision, is she put somebody in charge who doesn't make the decisions, but he facilitates the team in making the decisions. So the SLT in that insurance company that this guy has now become CEO of, they make decisions as a unit together all the time. He just asks the questions. He puts a number of possibilities on the table. They make the decisions. And because they feel empowered to make the decisions, they're making better and better decisions. And in her words, the productivity has gone through the roof. And that, to me, is that's brilliant safety. It's not about the senior leader having all the answers. It's actually more about the senior leader having all the questions.
Yeah. I mean, that might be a good place to jump into our 5 competencies, because
I love the way you say competencies, by the way.
That's because I struggle to say that word, so I have to really slow it down. Competencies.
Yeah.
So yeah, the first one, and sorry, what I should say is this is from Steve Worthy's. You'll find this on Steve Worthy's LinkedIn profile. It's something he shared on his profile recently. Top 5 retail leadership competencies, but they literally apply to business. It's anything.
Yeah. And actually, and it is a thing like that. Steve has given us permission to use this in his absence, and we're hoping he gets here at some point today, because he is a fabulous speaker and he's really worth listening to. But I think this is a really interesting thing to discuss, and I'm very grateful to Steve for sharing it with us.
Yeah. So to using the Sam White example, like, I mean, that was humility, in spades. The fact that she fired herself, hired a guy maybe who, if it was put to an interview process, would never have got the job.
Would never have got to the interview.
Yeah, I might think you got to the interview, exactly, yeah. And and did a phenomenal job by empowering the team to, do what they're all individually good at, or what they were hired to do, essentially. And would you think it's fair to say that there's possibly a lack of humility all across the corporate world, or is it just that the bad eggs tend to show up?
Um, I don't know. It's a very simplistic way to view it, as kind of like good eggs and bad eggs. I think it's more. I think there's an awareness of like what does humility even mean? Like what is humility as a leader? And for me, it's very simply that I think the traditional way in the corporate world is that when you get promoted to the C-suite level, you feel like it's your responsibility to have all the answers. You're the one with the most experience in the company. Usually, like at C-suite, you're talking about people who've like 20 years experience in a certain field, and they feel like if they don't have the answers in meetings, then they're kind of undermining themselves and they look like they don't know what they're doing. And I always remember there's a great story about Toyota, and it's to do with Kaizen. And you've heard me talk about Kaizen before. It's the Japanese thing about, achieving big picture success by little victories. And the first time that Toyota hired a VP from outside Japan was a guy they brought in from the States. And he was coming in to have a look at their manufacturing. And at their first board meeting, where they're all sitting around the table and they're all discussing where they're going, he did this presentation about all the brilliant things they were implementing. And he's like, and this is awesome. And this is going to put us through the roof. And this is really going to impact on us. And he delivered this traditional kind of, I've got all the answers kind of approach to the board. And about halfway through his presentation, the chairman of the board stopped him and said,
"Don't leave us hanging, Niall. You're frozen there, if you can hear me."
"We want you to tell us is not all these brilliant things. We want you to tell us where are our weaknesses and what can we do better." And he said he was completely thrown for a loop, because suddenly he was left with, I don't have to have the answers. What I actually should be doing is saying, these are the questions that are coming from the people around me, and these are the issues we need to address. And I think it's not a bad egg scenario. I think it's more, how do companies hear the voices of people at all levels of the organization? And I'm a big fan of, a lot of companies have kind of gone I've really stripped away the traditional management structure and have very few levels of management. Like there's some companies went from having 10 levels of management to 3. And it's not because you don't want to encourage people by promoting them. It's that you want to create an environment where actually, and it's one of the lovely things about working in a startup, you sit in a room with people of different levels and you're just basically throwing an idea out and everybody's offering an opinion. And it's that kind of thing, that being comfortable or having the humility to allow everyone a voice. And sometimes it's simply having the humility to say, my idea was to do it this way, but having heard what you guys have said, I think maybe we should do it that way. And accepting that you don't always have the answers, you don't always have to have the answers, and that when you hire brilliant people, you hire them because they're brilliant. So let them be brilliant, and don't tell them and prescribe to them how to do their job. And I think that's an important aspect of humility.
Yeah. We'll move on to the second one, which is accountability. Which is, I suppose, it's about owning the victories, but the losses as well. And I think we tend to, and again, not to keep referencing the Sam podcast episode, but she spoke about how there was this sort of image of CEOs never being wrong and always getting it right. And then even when they do get it wrong, you nearly have to double down on the mistake by saying, well, it wasn't a mistake, it was actually a really good decision and it worked.
Yeah.
And it gets into this kind of compounding interest of the negative being an ever increasing downward spiral, if you like, instead of being a virtual increasing or virtual spiral up. And that's not to say that accountability has to be about blame. It's just about really acknowledging and putting the hands up, and I suppose learning from the mistakes. It's like the adage in sport, which you've definitely said, and I think Benny was saying, that when we spoke to him a couple of weeks ago. It's the winner learn mentality rather than win or lose. And if you lose, you forget about that. And we never talk about that, and we just focus on the wins. You know, it's having a more balanced perspective on the things that happen in the business or in the team or to the team.
Yeah, and it's something that I saw a lot of, particularly in the last, 5 to 6 years in sport, is the real reliance on, say, video analysis after games. And the video analysis, it's not about kind of sitting in a room making people feel small because they made mistakes, but it's about, like, I always remember a conversation with Joe Schmidt where they were talking about in 2013, Ireland played New Zealand in an international in Lansdowne Road. And Ireland had never beaten New Zealand in the 100-year history of both nations' rugby union teams. And Ireland were in front. They were 5 points in front with a minute left on the clock. And Ireland had the ball in the New Zealand half and they turn it over. And then New Zealand, and I actually used the next passage of play as an instruction to teams of all sports about what it means to know your roles, do your job, because New Zealand were phenomenal. They did nothing spectacular, but every single person on the team fronted up, showed up, took the ball, did their job, and they just went through the phases, scored in the corner. And in Joe Schmidt's explanation of that, so this is like the first time Ireland are ever going to beat New Zealand. And they're devastated after the game because they've just blown it in injury time. I mean, even the referee, I remember Nigel Owens was refereeing, and he got the video analysis guy to go back and check about 17 different things to see if he could find a reason not to give the try, because everybody knew how big a deal it was for Ireland to beat New Zealand. But Joe Schmidt, in his reaction to that defeat and in his video analysis with the team and in his conversations privately with his coaches, he didn't speak about, the pain, the hurt, the blowing it, whatever. He spoke about 5 systems failures that caused New Zealand's try. That any one of those 5 mistakes, you eradicate any one of those 5, and the ball doesn't end up in the corner where you've got a 2-on-1 and a guy goes over in the corner and scores. And to me, I thought that was fascinating, because all of a sudden, you're taking a devastating defeat and you're taking a whole range of things that people have done wrong. And what people forget is that about 10 minutes before that, Johnny Sexton has a penalty almost straight in front of the post, just slightly to the right of the post, to put Ireland 8 points up, which meant New Zealand would have needed 2 scores and the game would have been Ireland's. That would have killed the game. It was, for a guy of his caliber, it was a tap over and he missed it. So people forget that because they focus on, the mistakes made by the couple of guys right at the very end when the try scored. But to me, what Joe Schmidt did was he took the personal responsibility away from an individual. So there was no blaming one person. There's a series of errors that were made. But he also laid it on their table to say, what are we going to do about these systems failures? And how do we ensure these systems failures don't happen again? And the net result of that is that 2 years later, Ireland beat New Zealand for the first time. They hammered them in Chicago by about 30 points. And Ireland have beaten them 2 times more since. Because the whole philosophy that it can't be done was taken away, but it was done by acknowledging that we did all these brilliant things, but here are 5 systems failures and we're going to fix those. If we fix even one of those 5, we beat New Zealand. And suddenly you take away the daunting task and you make it more about, we're just going to fix these little things and we're going to achieve Kaizen and we're going to achieve the big picture goal by improving little details along the way.
Yeah. And it's not about blaming the system failures on people. It's just, this is what we're going to improve so then next time
because the system is the problem, not the individual.
So listen, before you get too carried away with your New Zealand bashing, I want you to introduce Steve, because thankfully, as we explained, he has overcome the connectivity issues. So Niall, in the only way you can possible, please give Steve the introduction worthy of him.
We are not worthy.
Mea culpa.
Hey, Steve, how you doing, my friend?
I
hope your tech issues are sorted, yeah?
They are. I am good to go. I appreciate it.
We've just been killing time till you got here. Don't worry.
Yeah. We've been talking about my favorite hobbies. Actually, we're into point 3 of your 5 competencies at this stage. But
I heard football. So that's my passion too. Just I don't think you knew that. I don't think you knew.
I saw the helmet behind you, man.
No, not that football. Not that football. That football too. But this is my favorite team right here.
Oh,
Man.
no way.
Yeah. So
That's
and I just in case you wanted to, we wanted to get real, and just talk about this a little bit. My great team here, Man City,
You've just lost half our audience. So in order to welcome, as I say, kind of, I'm very fortunate in the work I do because I get to meet extraordinary people, and I would include Steve Worthy as one of them. Steve is a guy who's really challenged the world of executive coaching and is a leader in the US in challenging executives to be better, and to be better in the sense of all the things we're talking about, but understanding, as we've spoken about before, not the soft skills, but the essential skills of a great leader. He also hosts a wonderful podcast series, and I think, Steve, I'll let you introduce your own podcast series and tell us a little bit about where your passion comes from for this stuff.
Oh man, thank you. I appreciate you being on here, and thank you. I apologize once again for the technical issues that we kind of experienced over here in the States a little bit. So Steve Worthy, executive retail leadership coach. Love my passion. I honestly believe that retail leaders are the backbone of America, of leadership. I don't think retail leaders get enough due. I've been a retail for the last 26 years and just developed this passion for helping them understand how they become managers to actual leaders, not just them individually, but go into corporations and actually help them with their current leadership teams and making them better by helping them understand a little bit more about themselves so that they say no to some of that other nonsense and actually kind of become the leaders that they've always wanted to. So, now as we talked a lot about kind of my passion, or my passion for leadership developed over time. It wasn't there initially. We can get into that. We can get into that a little bit too.
Okay, yeah, let's go straight into that, Steve, because that sounds like someone who maybe were you the type who challenged authority or felt threatened by authority, or had you some kind of issue with authority?
No, it wasn't so much the issue with authority. It was I didn't want to be in authority. I didn't want to be in leadership. I was chosen a lot to be in leadership roles, and I completely shied away from it. I was sharing the story when I was actually in the Air Force. They chose me to be what we call squad leader. So 60 people in the squadron, and I had to be over 20 of them. And I didn't want to do it. I was 18 years old, fresh out of New York. I'm not being responsible for 20 other people. I'm not doing it. And I tried my best to get out of it. I end up getting out of it, and I get back to the squadron, and my TI training instructor calls me in, and he's like, Worthy, come in there. Big 6'5", 6'6" dude. I can't remember his name, but he changed my life. And he said, Worthy, you think you got out of it? And I was like, what are you talking about? He said, you think you got out of leadership? He said, let me tell you this, leadership will always find you out. So you're not going to be squad leader anymore, but now you're going to be, latrine manager. You are responsible for the cleanliness level of our latrine for 60, 18 to 27-year-old dudes in Lackland Airport in Texas in the summer. Hot, nasty. And guess what? I was thrust into a leadership position, and I had to figure out what I needed to do and what I wanted to stand for. I quickly adapted to the role, and my leadership journey from there was on. And any opportunity that came about from a leadership standpoint, I started to raise my hand. While I may have not had the skills, I realized that people have seen something in me, so I think I will be doing them a disservice if I don't step into that role. And so, the leadership journey for me has been continual, and I've just been loving talking about it and helping people get there as well.
So what can I just ask you, Steve, what do you think people saw in, I think you said you were an 18-year-old. So what did they see in 18-year-old Steve Worthy that they
Yeah.
said, this guy is a leader, even though he's reluctant, he needs to be a leader? What do you think they saw in you?
You know, I think there was my ability to adapt to people and connect with people. I think at an early age, growing up in New York, you grow up around everybody, different income levels, different ethnicities, different thought processes. And so you have to adapt. You have to figure it out. And I think that's a massive part of leadership. And I think at an early age, plus I'm the youngest of seven. And so, having to kind of not fight and claw your way, because we had a good family structure, but like developing your own voice, out of seven other people, I think I was able to do that early, and understood kind of what I stood for, which was connecting with people, and trying to get the best out of them. And I think they saw that, how I was able to kind of connect with people very quickly and kind of get them on board with doing something. So I think those are some of the things that they saw.
Yeah, very good. So just while you were talking about being able to connect and communicate with people, that brings us to
point 3.
Point 3, yeah, sorry. StreamYard was doing funny things there. So point 3, and I explained to people that this is from a document that you've shared on your LinkedIn profile, so they can get it there. We will also share links to it in the comment section underneath the stream afterwards. So point number 3, communications. So we've been through humility and accountability.
Good.
And communication then is obviously key, because look, at the end of the day, you can't read minds. Body language will get you so far. So actually, communicating is, in a verbal fashion is the only way we're really going to fully understand each other.
Yeah, agreed. And I think when I think about communication, I think about it also in the first context is listening, right? I think before you even communicate something, I think there has to be an idea of where that person currently is. Within their journey. I just did an episode with Retail Leadership with Steve Worthy, and we talked a little bit about how to ask questions, right? I had a guest on there, James Hicks, and we talk about a lot of this with our clients too, is their ability to ask really good questions so that they can try to get the most out of people. So I think that is almost one of the foundational pieces of communication, is your ability to be able to communicate a question that's going to provide more insight into that person. And then how can you communicate how you're there to help them, or what you need to do to get the best out of them in that context. So the communication doesn't start with you just speaking about where we need to go. It's actually having a better understanding of where somebody is first, or where your team is first, first and foremost. And then once you're able to do that, now you can devise almost like a communication strategy of what you need to do to get the best out of people, so you can move things forward.
That's like it's one of Steve Covey's 7 habits.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Seek to understand.
Seek to understand before being understood.
Yeah, exactly.
100%. And I think that's the issue with leaders, right? We are so we're put in these positions of leadership, and so we think we should have all the answers. And I tell you what, that is so far from the truth. The best leaders that I've worked with and know, and that we help people with, is helping them understand the importance of gathering insight and the collective idea. Now, are you going to be responsible probably for the end outcome and probably the direction? 100%. But making sure that you're actually be able to bring people along for the ride, and understanding the importance of where they are within that process, right? So we start talking about communication. You have to communicate their importance of where they are within that process of where you want to go. And a lot of leaders don't do that. They don't take the time to communicate that, and they just assume that people understand their importance, and you can't do that. You can't assume. But once you communicate that, now you can move the ball collectively faster than you would if you didn't communicate that up front.
No, I just want to bring you in. Like, how many times in your professional career have you seen communication being the problem? Like when you're brought in to work with a team, or you've worked with sports teams, but you've worked with business teams and sales teams. How often have you seen that? Actually, I know what to fix here, lads. It's really simple. It's just communication.
I would say, do you know what, Gus? I'd say probably almost always.
Yeah.
The power of messaging, and it's something I worked a lot on with coaches. And sometimes people would assume when you go in and do kind of mental skill stuff that you're working with players all the time. But actually, sometimes the biggest challenge is working with the coaches and getting
100%.
them to understand the power of their messaging.
Oh,
You know, like I've worked with one particular team that had they were a football team, and they had an amazing offense, but their defense was a bit okay. So basically, all their messaging about defense was, if you guys can just hang in there, if you can kind of just like if you guys can just survive, our offense guys will get us out of a hole. So there was, and then all the messaging before every game would be about the for the defense it'd be about, well, this guy's brilliant and he's going to do this, and it's almost impossible to stop him. So you guys just got to, if he can hang on, or if you can just like every now and again get something out of it, and it was all really, really negative. And the thing that I felt, and this is something I feel like when we're talking to teams, if we're kind of saying, look, our opposition or our competition is killing us, and we're really struggling here. Well, what if we were to turn that messaging around, and instead of it being, well, offense will dig us out every week, because what you're actually doing with the defense is you're giving them permission to fail. You're saying to them, I don't expect you to do anything in this game. So you can go out and be as crap as you always are, and everything will be fine because offense will save us. But what if the messaging flipped around and it's kind of like, okay, so what we're going to try and do today is get like this 1% better. What if you guys go out and smash them? What if you win that first line of scrimmage? What does that mean for the rest of the game? And what does that mean to the offense, guys? That it's not offense will save your bacon. It's you guys are going to build a platform so these guys can look even better. And when you look at the Super Bowl just gone, some incredible offensive play in that Super Bowl. It was a really, really entertaining game. Who got MVP?
Super Bowl.
The MVP in the Super Bowl was a defense player.
Right.
Was a guy who smashed the quarterback all day long. He was insanely good. But he provided the platform for the quarterback and the wide receivers to look good. And it's that thing about understanding messaging. Like, what if he was playing in a team where all the talk, like just say, for example, you're playing in a team with Tom Brady, and Tom Brady is renowned for being smart enough to include all his players in everything he does. And Tom Brady has taken pay cuts to hire better players around him because he understands that winning Super Bowls is far more important and will generate more money in the long run than his salary anyway. But what if all the messaging is, oh, Tom Brady's a hero and he'll save us? All the rest of the guys, it's kind of like when you look at The Last Dance and Michael Jordan. Like, you're looking at players like Scottie Pippen, who was an absolute genius of his time and probably the second best player in the NBA of that generation. But he then has been almost called as a bit player, as a support man to Jordan. When Pippen in his own right was a brilliant, brilliant player. But what they managed to do as a team was when they went out on the court, they understood, yes, Jordan is a freak and he's going to do amazing things. But all of us have a job to do. And Dennis Rodman, whose simple job was to stop the opposition scoring. But what happens, like basketball is a great example, actually. It's a great metaphor for life, really, because what happens in basketball is you have to stop the opposition scoring in order for you to go down the court and get a basket. So stopping the guy getting in is as important as the guy dunking it in the basket. And where that Chicago Bulls team were extraordinarily good was that Phil Jackson, their head coach, understood messaging to each individual to keep them all engaged in their individual importance. And one of the lesser known players in that team, one of the guys who was kind of almost a bit part player, was a guy called Steve Kerr. Steve Kerr is now the most successful coach in the NBA, working down at the Golden State Warriors, because he learned about messaging from Phil Jackson. In short, having gone on that little rant about sport, communication is at the heart. The ability to give and receive feedback, even your body language, matters. If somebody says something and you're throwing your eyes to heaven, you've already lost the room because they know you don't want to hear the message. If you can take it in, if you can process it, and if it's a bad message, that you know how to communicate that honestly back to someone is the key to all great leadership, I feel.
Yeah. Yeah.
And sorry to jump in there. If I could just cut in and just give you an example of something we do in the Pep Talk product. This was something I know you're keen on, Niall. So at the start, at the top, I mentioned that our product is based on insight, action, and measure. So this is how we gather the insight. We have something called a team check-in, which is a regular monthly feature where people can tell us how they feel about the month ahead, and then things that they could have been better in the month previous, or maybe it was recognition and teamwork, or maybe not teamwork, but say connection. And then we get a feel for how the team is. And then all the content that we will provide from our team will be aimed at working on these areas like connection, teamwork, and self-care, that kind of thing. And why that is important is, if I just skip over here, in work, we're used to, so the comms is usually just one way down from the kind of management to the employees. And there's one annual engagement survey. But what we're seeing here, what this graph is hopefully showing people, is that more recently, regular monitoring of employees and asking for feedback more regularly is on the increase. And 80% of companies are doing it now versus 63 looking for the annual engagement survey. So I think that was a point you were saying. So communication, like it's the seek to understand, then to be understood. Like you gotta ask your people first if you're trying to get the most out of them.
Yeah. Can we talk about that annual engagement survey too, just a bit too, right?
Yeah,
I think when I think about that one, people draw and infer just so much information out of that I think almost sometimes is necessary. And I also think sometimes in the context of like the bigger organization, I think touch points leading up to that annual survey, right? I found were like more beneficial. And just in retail, I'll use retail as just an example, because here's why. You're taking a survey on a certain day, and man, just about I couldn't come in that day, and I'm freaking pissed off at Gus. I'm super pissed off at Gus.
Sounds like it every day for me. But anyway.
Gus just fired my best friend, right? And you want me to take a survey? Okay, give me the survey. Give me the survey. give it to me right now, right? What? You just cut my pay? You just cut my hours? Oh my gosh! I just had my boss's boss just came in and they ripped me one on an interview on a visit. Give me the survey. Give me the survey. Right? Keyboard, keyboard, junkies, right? And so a lot of times when I watched the survey, the data is great, but then I look at the comments within that data, within those the annual surveys, because the comments I think are richer than sometimes the overall result too, right? So making sure that when you look at the annual results for your company, is looking at the comments therein and then kind of taking some of those things out, because I think you'll be able to get a lot more information. But also doing touch points with your team, right? Before then, right? And making sure that they're genuine, right? Not doing touch points in a restaurant, right before taking everybody out to dinner, right before the survey. So like, oh my gosh, Gus just took us out to dinner and I was giving me the survey. No, do something that kind of consistently, and that way I think you'll get a better result there as well.
And I think what's interesting, and where the ambition came from with this team check-in that we've brought into our app is it gives you a layer of information. So as you say, it's a regular occurring thing rather than an annual thing.
Oh, perfect.
But it also takes us back to point 2 about accountability. That now that you are aware of this information,
what are you going to do with it?
There's an onus on you to do something about it. And this is where communication comes in. This is where our next point, approachability, comes in that, somebody has to be comfortable having a conversation with you. But if you know that your team are anxious, well, then there's got to be a follow-up step. There has to be actions that you have to be able to kind of, like, for me personally, it's, I know my team are anxious right now, so we're going to address that over the next 4 weeks.
Yes.
But each week we're going to check in and say, okay, guys, are we doing anything to shift the dial on this level of anxiety, and are we improving things? And it's a tool for leaders and managers especially. Yeah. It's a tool for them to have to make decisions and engage their team in a different way. But there's also that kind of accountability that, you know, if you're aware of this stuff, you can't just ignore it. You've got to do something about it. And that's where being approachable is really important, Gus, which I know is where you want to go next.
We're the slickest thing on two wheels now, I have to say.
Oh, I tell you, man.
So, yeah, no, we were going to get to, and I was going to bring up the approachable. Tell us about Sam Walton, Steve.
Yeah, so Sam Walton, right, started, of course, Walmart, right, one of the biggest companies in the entire world. And one of the things that he's famous for was just his measure of approachability when he actually would come into, you know, a store. Right, here's one of the richest men, you know, at his time, coming into, you know, a store and being able to just connect with people on a human level, and that just got the most out of people. So for me, one of the things that I say, and I've talked to Niles about this, is that I feel like approachability is probably one of the most underrated leadership skills that a leader could have. Right, for me, it's actually been my secret weapon. If you will, people, I just gave it away now. But it has been my secret weapon over my career, has been my ability to be approachable. I've been able to use that skill set to kind of allow people to let their hair down and ask me a question and be open. You start talking about the nonverbal aspect, right? They'll come to them in a closed stance, have a very open stance, and they're able to kind of come in, and I can draw them in and ask deeper questions, or maybe just ask one question that will actually allow us to go a little deeper. And now you're able to, you know, gain more insight into that individual, but also to your organization, right? Because if they're a big player within your organization, you're coming in as a coach, you're coming as a leader, you want as much information as possible, so that way you can help them and to communicate differently. But that approachability, being able to allow people in, you know, to come towards you, and there's no fear of reprisal. I can ask you any question. It could be difficult. It could be something that you don't want to hear, right? I have dealt with it in my retail career. I don't know how many times. When you walk into a store, or you walk in, and that first person that runs up to you, and they're like, "Hey, Steve, can I talk to you about something?" I'm like, "Oh, like, okay." You know, I can't stand this store. The leadership in this store, da 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 da, right? And they just go off, right? But I'm there, and I'm approachable, and I'm hearing it. And next thing you know, I turn it on its face and say, "Well, what role are you playing with, you know, with this?" Now it's a little bit different. They were able to kind of throw all this stuff at you. Now you can kind of turn a little bit and ask them the role that they're playing. So I think the approachability is something that a lot of people have to kind of get a better understanding of, and actually put that in their leadership arsenal as well.
We have our own version of Sam Walton in Ireland, a guy called Fergal Quinn, who had a chain like a supermarkets, grocery stores. And they became, I think they might have been maybe the biggest in Ireland at the time, or they're certainly one of the biggest. And he used to regularly turn up in stores and spend the day on the floor.
Yes.
And then implement things that people would say to him during the day. "Oh, I'll tell you what, Fergal, I'm really not happy about the way whatever's laid out. And it's just so
100%.
hard to do." And he would implement changes based on that real life feedback.
100%.
And maybe 15-ish years ago, the chain was sold then to another retailer, and the amount of people who would say in the store, it's not the same. It's not the way it was when Fergal was here. It's totally different. And maybe it's gone a bit more commercial, or maybe it's gone the way the other company was. But that's, you know, that. So it's not, you know, Sam Walton exists probably. There's probably a Sam Walton in every country, and it's not like a secret code. It's just like you say, being approachable, being available to hear what people have to say. And quite often the guys who complain get the bad rap, but they're the ones that care enough to tell you.
100%. 100% agree with you, Gus. And then, but you said something earlier too that I think is the other thing. It's actually the execution of the feedback that you receive as the leader, right? So you were just saying, like, you know, I can walk into a store and someone gives me feedback about something, and if I don't maybe take that feedback to heart and try to implement it or make a change within that structure in some way, shape, or form, guess what? I just lost a lot of credibility with that person. They're not going to come to me again when I come into that store. They're going to be, "Oh my gosh, I see Steve. I gave him this feedback and nothing was done about it." Now, here's the other thing. If there is nothing I can do about it, my goal as a leader is to go back and reconnect with that person and say, it's Gus, and say, hey, Gus, I appreciate the feedback that you gave me, but we're not going to be able to do X, Y, and Z at this time. We may be able to do this one. How's that going to work for you? But just to actually go back and do that creates more credibility. And actually, that's almost kind of the reverse approachability, because now you're approaching them based off of what they gave you, and you're letting them know what you're actually going to be able to do with that information. And so I think you have to look at it from both ways as well.
Which probably brings us nicely to number 5, decision making. So like I say there, Steve, it's taking the info and then doing something with it. And even if that doing something is, you know what, we're actually not going to do anything. The decision to not do something is still a decision in itself.
100%. 100%. I think, not doing something sometimes it gets a bad rap, because it was like, oh my gosh, something can always be done. Something maybe not, right? Or maybe just the timing isn't correct. And so you have to, as a leader, be able to assess that, the timing of the feedback, your ability. Here's the other thing: you may not be the decision maker for what needs to take place. And so it goes back. It may go back up, the ladder. So you look at the decision that needs to be made, and you don't have the authority to make that decision. But guess what? You go back up to your boss. You have poor communication with your boss. Your boss isn't approachable. You have poor communication with them, right? They lack accountability. So you start to think about all these different layers. When you start to think about a decision, do you have the authority to make it? And if you do, great. If not, then you start to replay. How is this going to go if I bring it up to Gus? What is Gus going to think? Is he going to actually back me, right? Do I have the credibility that I can bring something to Gus that Gus is going to be like, hey, go ahead, Steve, I like that idea? Or is Gus going to be like, dude, no, that's stupid. That's just crazy. So you also have to think about decision making in the context of like, do you have the authority to do it? And is it going to be the best thing for all parties involved? And if not, be able to communicate that as well as effectively as possible.
I also think it's and Steve, you missed the point 1 when we were talking about humility, but
yes.
We were mentioning that I did a podcast recently with a lady called Sam White, and we were just talking about the fact that she fired herself as CEO and hired her coach as CEO of that company, and his job is to facilitate decision making.
Come on.
So he doesn't make the decisions, but what he does is he throws questions out to the SLT. They come to decisions, and he's basically happy to go kind of, okay, this makes absolute sense to me. Let's go with it. So they're making the decisions.
Yes.
He, as the CEO, is kind of facilitating the conversations and rubber stamping their decisions. But unless he fundamentally disagrees with something they're talking about,
right,
he's absolutely happy for, okay, well, look, this is your baby, this is your department, you know what you're talking about, let's go with it. And the level of trust that builds in the SLT, and for individuals who feel like, actually, he respects me enough in my expertise of what I'm doing that he's going to let me make a decision.
Yes.
And I think that's really, really cool and very powerful.
Yeah. First, I want his job. I want his job first and foremost.
Yeah.
That's like sign me up. Sign me up. That's I can do that from here. Actually, just like,
yeah.
I don't even need to go anywhere. Just bring me all that information. Let me make.
But it's funny though, like, I mean, so many people, like, you work really hard to get to a senior level, and you get to these positions in life, and there's a bit of an ego thing in it,
Yeah,
like,
massive.
I've worked so hard to get here. Now you want me to give away my, my power and my credibility to somebody else. And I think it goes back to Carol Dweck, who wrote this brilliant book, Mindset. She's a professor in Stanford University, and she gave examples of growth mindset and closed mindset in senior leadership in the corporate world. And the two examples she gave were of Lou Gerstner at IBM and Lee Iacocca at Chrysler.
Mm.
And what she was saying was, Lee Iacocca had come from Ford. He was the golden-haired boy coming out of Ford. He was Henry Ford's, ordained, genius leader. Goes into Chrysler, and he surrounds himself with yes men, and he's very much making all the calls, and everybody's just agreeing with him. Yeah. And the company tanks. It goes nowhere, right? It fails spectacularly. Lou Gerstner goes into IBM, who are a company who are failing at the time, and does the opposite. He surrounds himself with really brilliant people, and then literally every week he
Come on.
spends the entire meeting asking questions. Everybody's answering questions. So what's happening is he's educating himself on areas he knows nothing about, but also the senior leadership team are engaging in conversations across departments, understanding what all of them, all the challenges they're facing. Also a little bit of understanding that we're not all functioning in a silo, that, you know, just because the tech department might be enormously swamped doesn't mean that the marketing department aren't swamped, or the sales department aren't swamped, or the program department aren't swamped, or whatever the case may be. And he revolutionized IBM, and IBM was basically reborn as a serious entity through his leadership, where he basically gave the power to really clever people that he hired.
Correct.
And I mean, it's not that he gave up the power as such. Like it theoretically, he gives the decision making to other people, but he still is in control of the direction the company's going. Like he's still signing off on the decisions, but he's trusting people to make smart decisions.
100%.
You know, and I love that. From my perspective, you know, like working in sport, I'm not going to go into a team and say, do you know what, the S&C needs to be better over there, or, you know, I don't like what the canteen is providing them for food. I'm not a nutritionist, I'm not an S&C coach, but when we sit around the table and you've got a senior leader or a head coach, whatever, who's asking the questions, and suddenly you hear the challenges a nutritionist is facing, or an S&C coach is facing, or a physio is facing, you start to think, actually, some of the things that I'm working on could benefit them. Like if a guy's mental skills are in a bad place, he's not turning up the training, and like, or if you're not sleeping well, the research tells us if you're not sleeping well, you're more susceptible to picking up an injury in training. So there's a correlation between nutrition, between sleep, between S&C, between mental skills. So suddenly there's 4 departments who are having a conversation about something that wouldn't have spoken to each other before. And it's just a very simple example. And Gus, I'm very conscious of the time, so I'm going to shut up now.
And you get to a better result, right? I think, I mean, to go back to the leadership and I call it hubris, right? There's the famous story with Henry Ford when he created the Model T, and it was all black. And they said, hey, you know, I think we need to, you know, do something in different colors, because we had a lot of other competitors that were just kind of starting a little bit. He said, yeah, we can have every other color if you want, as long as it's black. and so he didn't get off of that. And guess what? Other companies started to come up and kind of start to compete with them. But I think what we fail to realize with leadership, like there's 5 levels to leadership. There's oh my gosh, there's position, there's permission, production, people, and then there's what we call the pinnacle. Just because you are the CEO doesn't mean that you're actually at the pinnacle level. You can still be stuck at the positional level, because you're just so freaking happy to have the position as a CEO, and you're going to, you know, almost lord over people because you have that position. And that's where people have to understand that they have to do the work to get through those levels, to get to that pinnacle, if you will, of understanding that you have to have some humility. You actually have to be able to bring more people to the table so that collectively you will be better as a leader. I always say this too, and you know this too now, the higher you go, the less feedback you get sometimes, right? CEOs at certain levels, who's challenging them, right? Thank God your girl, your guest Sam, she had the wherewithal to say, okay, I need to bring somebody else in. There's not a lot of leaders that actually have that level of self-awareness to do that. So kudos on her. She needs to teach a class on
that.
Just because of time, I think we will wrap it up there, folks. Right. So Steve, first of all, the penalty for your connectivity issues is we're going to have to get you back on again.
Okay.
On for another leadership topic in
absolutely
a couple of weeks or months, or whatever your schedule allows. That was a fascinating chat. It certainly did not feel like 54 minutes. I'm gonna thank you as usual for your time, Niall, and I'm gonna thank you, Steve, especially for having to endure the few problems you had.
Yes, man, I appreciate it. Thank you, guys.
You pushed through and you got to us in the end, so that's brilliant. And I will thank everyone who watched either this or the replay, and tune in next Thursday, 3:00 GMT, for the next episode of Pep Talk Live. So we'll see you then, folks. Take it easy.
Just before we sign off, Gus, I just want to
Yes.
say personally, Gus is not going to be joining us from here on. He's moving on to pastures new. And I just want to say how much of a pleasure and an honor it's been to work with you, and especially on these kind of things. It's an absolute joy, and you're going to be missed. And I wish you all the success and happiness in the future.
I love his haircut. You can't go nowhere, Gus. I just got used to these last 45 minutes. You can't go nowhere, dude.
It may not be the last time I'm on this live stream, but probably the last time I'm hosting it.
Okay.
Yeah,
all
there
right.
you go.
All right. There we go.
Appreciate the kind words, Niall. Thanks a million. And likewise, it's been a
Thanks,
pleasure.
Gus. And
Right,
thank you,
folks.
Steve.
We'll see
Bye,
you
guys.
See you soon.
Bye.
Cheerio.
Bye, guys.